Hey, it's Supernova here. If you live in the United States of America, you're probably familiar with the phrase religious right, and that refers to fundamentalist Christians who are also conservative Republicans. And while those two groups may overlap a lot, such as in their stance on pro life and the abortion debate, stance against gay marriage, and their lack of care about the environment, they have a lot in common, Christians and Republicans. I should probably clarify this last point, lack of care about the environment. If you go to GOP.com and look at the 2012 Republican platform, then you'll find that Republicans claim to care about protecting the environment. And while they acknowledge the success so far in the federal government's doing that, they want to shift the focus away from the federal government to state governments as if they don't understand the conflict of interest between states' need for prosperity and the money spent on protecting the environment, which is clear in how they acknowledge the success that we've had so far in protecting the environment, but don't actually say the EPA and the federal government did it. So in this way, the Christians who believe in Armageddon and don't think that any of these problems with the environment will ever actually come to fruition are like the Republicans. So there's a reason why most fundamentalist Christians are in the Republican Party. But despite that, Christians didn't make the Republican Party, so there are differences. And in debating with Christians and having discussions with Christians, I found that Christians don't tend to see these differences. It would create cognitive dissonance, and so they've rationalized it so that they don't see the differences anymore, just like they don't see the contradictions in the Bible. But let me discuss at least a couple here quick. The first one is that Republicans are all for the right to bear arms. And I mean, Democrats are too. It's enumerated in the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States that we have a right to bear arms. So everybody believes in that, but Democrats see it in the more literal sense as written in the Second Amendment as having to do with the rights of militias, and they don't see it as a general right that everybody ought to be able to carry weapons and whatever weapons they want with very little limits or restrictions. Whereas Republicans are against those limits and restrictions and want to make sure that everybody has the right to bear arms. And again, on GOP.com, you can see the reasons why. The right to bear arms isn't specifically anti-Christian, but the defenses that the Republican Party uses to back up their position on the right to bear arms are anti-Christian. The first one they use is they say that we need the right to defend ourselves, self-defense. They don't want people to be able to mug them on the street or seize their property or threaten them. They say the best remedy for bad guys with guns is good guys with guns. The Bible doesn't say that. Jesus, in his ministry, didn't carry a weapon. He told his disciples not to carry weapons. He said only cloaks and sandals and staffs. He had the chance to defend himself. In the book of John, a mob is going to push him off a cliff, and he doesn't fight back. He doesn't punish those people. He just walks through the crowd. One could see that as a miraculous salvation from this attack on his life. He wasn't big on self-defense. He wasn't a violent person. He also taught against self-defense. In Matthew chapter 5, in the Sermon on the Mount, he tells people that if someone strikes you on the cheek, turn to them the other cheek. If somebody sues you, give them more than what they're asking for. If somebody wants to borrow, give them whatever. And says, don't repay evil for evil. Vengeance is mine. Don't defend yourself. Don't hurt people who are trying to hurt you. Just let them do it. Most of us see that as irrational, and we really don't believe in the whole this will cause them to feel even worse. It will heap burning coals on their head to be nice to them when they're being mean to you. It clearly doesn't work in practice. But that's what it says in Matthew 5 and again in Luke 6 when he gives this same speech. And when it's reiterated in Romans 12, one of my favorite chapters, the one that actually says do not repay evil with evil. So Clearly, he doesn't want you to be able to defend yourself. He thinks God should be able to do it for you. How about defending others? Well, again, Jesus had the opportunity to defend an adulteress who was being dragged out into the street to be stoned in the Gospel of John. And he does defend her, but not with weapons. He does it with reason, which seems clearly within the interest of Christians. There are plenty of parts where my favorite verse, in fact, says that Christians ought to defend their faith with reason. So again, not against defense of others. When Jesus was arrested, Peter had a sword and cut off the ear of the high priest, and Jesus rebuked him and said he was doing wrong and restored the high priest's ear. I don't know why Peter would have a sword, since the disciples were clearly told not to carry weapons, but just a little Bible contradiction. And so when Peter did this, he said that's a no-no. And I know, again, we see Jesus using a weapon when he drives the money changers out of the temple with a whip. And again, it's just a Bible contradiction. It's not Jesus being meek, as he said, "Blessed are the meek." It's not turning the other cheek. But I think the main emphasis of the Bible is on nonviolence and not self-defense. The other reason that the Republicans give for this right to bear arms is they say that you have to be able to revolt against the tyranny of the country, which is completely out of what the Bible wants. In the chapter after Romans 12, Romans 13, first 5 verses say that God sets up the powers that be, the authorities that are over you. And in verse 2, Romans 13:2, Christians are told that they will go to hell if they rebel against those powers that are put above them. So clearly God doesn't want a revolt. I mean, yeah, the forefathers did it, but it doesn't necessarily mean they acted in a Christian way. It doesn't mean they were right. I personally don't think they were right. I don't think you ought to revolt against the government. So that reason is right out for Christians too, unless they're acting out of politics rather than the Christian values. The second big conflict between Republican ideology and Christian values is rich versus poor. It couldn't be any clearer in the Bible. There are verse after verse. I'm not going to go through them all. Look them up on your own. Exhorting people who are poor, saying that the desperately poor will inherit the earth, that you should give to the poor, that you should be kind to the poor, blessed are the poor. There's just so many good things said about the poor, and there's good reason for this. Jesus was biased. He was poor. He was homeless. He spent his ministry wandering from place to place with no possessions, living off the land and presumably off the kindness of strangers. He loved the poor, and so he spoke about them often and in glowing terms. He said when he separated the sheep from the goats, he'd know the goats, the ones to throw into the fire, as people who didn't feed and clothe and heal the poor, who didn't visit them in prison and such. Treatment of strangers, particularly people who are in need. That is what Jesus wanted. He talked about loving thy neighbor using the story of the Good Samaritan, talking about how people should help those who are in need, bleeding and wounded by the side of the road. I mean, I could go on and on. There's an equal hatred of wealth in the Bible. Only bad things are said about it. When the rich young ruler came to Jesus and said, "What do I have to do to be saved?" After Jesus said, "Follow the commandments," the next thing he said is, "Give away all of your wealth. Give it to the poor," because Jesus was for redistribution of wealth from the rich to the poor, clearly. And he said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go to heaven, because that money is clearly a detriment to getting to heaven. Why? Because the love of money is the root of all evil, as the Bible clearly says. I mean, how could it be any clearer that Jesus hates love of money? Now, notice I say love of money, which is what Christians usually say in response to this. They try to demonstrate the difference between having money and loving money, as if They're completely separate things. But if you don't love money, you're not going to have it. People don't become wealthy by being indifferent or hating money. If you want lots of money, you have to work towards it. And you're only going to do that if you're motivated by love of money. How about if you get a whole bunch of money accidentally? I mean, people do inherit and such like that. Well, they could pass it on to the poor if they really didn't love that money, if they didn't value it and want it and love money. They simply wouldn't have it. So clearly, the wealthy love money, but the Republican Party protects the rights of the rich, and they try to lower taxes on the rich, and they're against these welfare programs that help the poor in the same way that Jesus commands you to help the poor. And it's just such a blatant attempt to ignore what the Bible says or rationalize it away. Because when Christians are confronted about these differences between their values and Republican values, they stand with Republican values time and time again in the experiences that I've had, um, which it's just so weird to me. So if you're a Christian, if you're part of the religious right, at least be aware of this. I mean, you don't necessarily have to leave the Republican Party. It probably is the best home for you, but don't let your politics dictate your values. Till next time, peace.